Perfect. Welcome, everybody. So sorry to cut coffee hour short. There was a lot of good conversation happening, but our service went a little bit long, and we want to make sure that we have some time for this amazing opportunity to talk today with Larry Buell, who I imagine most people here see on a Sunday morning. If RL is here, maybe we can... Sarah, there's a little feedback. But I was just saying, I imagine most of us get a chance to see Larry and Kim, and maybe we know a little bit about Larry's teaching and writing career. I just wanted to start with one story, which was, 2.5 years ago, Kit and I were starting to look for a church where we might be able to be co-ministers, and we saw the website of the First Parish in Lincoln, and we saw the search committee listed, and I said, I think I recognize that name, and then we had an introductory Zoom, and I said, yeah, this is the person whose books I read as an English major, and a book on eco-criticism, a book on Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I said, well, if this church has someone like that in it, we should consider, maybe checking it out. And so here we are.
You could have run the other way.
It's true. That's just all to say what a treat it's been for me to start to get to know Larry and Kim, and I'm really excited to have this chance to talk today. I won't list all of Larry's books or anything like that. I will just name 3 that I recommend checking out. 1995, The Environmental Imagination. 2003, biography, sort of study of Emerson. And then now this new book, which is really like hot off the press, kind of. It published in 2024. The first sort of concise overview study biography of Thoreau in the last 50 years or so. And Larry's going to get into a little bit of what led him to write this book now and some of what's inside here. And then I'm going to ask Larry a few questions, which I've been waiting years and years to ask. And then we'll turn it over to you all, and hopefully we'll have some conversation. So please join me in welcoming our own Larry Buell.
Well, thank you all for coming. I'm floored that so many have turned out, especially since I know that some of you have come to some of the other book talks that I've given in the area. Repeaters, wow. I'll try not to be redundant or to disappoint. Can you hear? You can't hear.
I think it is on. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I'm really not a shy person. Okay, so I'm going to say 3 types of things, and quickly, I hope, throw it open for Nate's questions and then for yours. How the book came to be. It was my COVID project, essentially, begotten from the importunities of a nice but persistent editor, a piece that I did about the explosion of new work on Thoreau around the time of his bicentennial that impressed me. The work impressed me more than my own piece, my review essay, but that made me susceptible to the editor's blandishments, and I thought, well, why not me? It's time for something, a new assessment that takes all this into consideration. So that's how the book came to be. But it's not the whole story of my life with Thoreau and the Transcendentalists. That'll come out later. The book is a 7-chapter, 115-page run-through that has 4 sections on key areas of Thoreau's accomplishment. Thoreau's the writer, Thoreau the natural scientist and forerunner of environmentalism, the political Thoreau, who's the patron saint of modern civil disobedience, and Thoreau the spiritual quester, one of the first of whom we might truly say he was spiritual but not religious, which is a persuasion, I think, that can resonate with a lot of us here at First Parish, including me. Then those are prefaced by 3 anchor chapters on Thoreau's lifeline and the myths that have sprung up around it, not least constructed by himself, about the Transcendentalist movement in the context of pre-Civil War reform enthusiasm, and how it, and especially its chief spokesperson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, influenced Thoreau. It served as an incubator for Thoreau's thought, a launching pad that he took off and grew beyond, but always stayed connected with. And then finally, for the anchor chapters, 1, 2, 3, a concentrated look at Thoreau's 2 most famous and influential works, Walden and Civil Disobedience, how they speak to each other. Usually they're discussed separately, even though they may be printed together in editions, and how they together offer themselves as a key to understanding almost everything else he wrote. So that's the package. The subtitle, the teaser, I think points to a constant trait in this writer that's on display in the book, Thinking Disobediently, that also has spoken to many readers over time. Ralph Waldo Emerson said of him in his funeral address for Thoreau, who died young, that his first instinct upon hearing a proposition was to controvert it. A habit, added Emerson, a little chilling to the social affections. Yes, indeed, sometimes. And you could say that my book, I never state this at any one point, but you could say about it that it takes this idea all the way down the line into every facet of Thoreau's thought. Resistance to entrenched religious orthodoxy, to overvaluation of book learning at the expense of experiential, deference to social pedigree, institutionalized slavery in the laws of the land, not just the South, but in the North, widening gap between rich and poor, runaway capitalism wasting the natural environment, and there were fewer breaks on that then than there are now. New era of machine politics that had just started. Martin Van Buren, the first perpetrator, became president the same year Thoreau graduated from college in the 1830s. And he lived, Thoreau, during his entire adult life under a series of really lousy presidents from the standpoint of his progressive values. Even Abraham Lincoln didn't speak to him because Thoreau died before Lincoln took his anti-slavery turn, his abolitionist turn. So think about that. If you're at all worried about the vicissitudes of the American presidency, can you take heart from that? Or, well, anyway. In general, does this sound familiar? All these different bones of contention that Thoreau dealt with and suffered from deeply and wrote about and against. I think they're all pretty transportable to our time, putting them in slightly different clothing. So the argument that I would make about Thoreau and his durability, and he has proved quite durable, is that he's not likely to go out of fashion, although he's always likely to remain controversial. And that's something we can talk about also, in what ways. To some, acutely irritating, to others, prophetic in his force, especially in one's own time, his own time, maybe more irritating than prophetic. Prophets are more attractive from a distance than they are up close, right? They make you feel a bit uncomfortable if you live next door to them. Heretics easier to take from a distance. So maybe this is one reason for choosing your personal pantheon of icons, mostly from figures of the past rather than the present. That's a kind of gentle justification of the historian's trade, spending a lot of one's mental life in the 19th century or previous epochs. It helps give perspective and inspiration on what one must do, choose, face in the present. So I think that's enough preamble, maybe too much. Ask away.
I think that's a great start. I thought maybe I'd just start by asking, I think for a lot of us who maybe you've lived in this area for years and years, or maybe like me, you've come back here after some time away, it still feels like transcendentalism, is in the air here in one way or another. And I just wanted to start by asking you, why devote a life to writing about Thoreau and Emerson and these other transcendentalists? What about the movement drew you in?
Well, there are different stages of involvement, really, several. And the story goes something like this. At first, Thoreau and the whole movement, the Transcendentalist movement, spoke to me on the spiritual side as a disaffected survivor of an Episcopalian boyhood, disenchanted with liturgicalism and wanting something free of that still carried a kind of value beyond the everyday and a compass of sorts. And in Thoreau's thought, and Transcendentalism too, I was especially attracted to the strong sense of the divine within the person and within the natural world. A country boyhood partly conduced to that. And that felt to me like a kind of stripped down and energized up sort of compass that would carry me forward, and not just me as an individual, freestanding, solitary person, because the idea, not altogether realized by some, I think, for the Transcendentalists, is that this divinity within the human isn't just an individual thing. It's shared across all humanity, and it conjoins people regardless of their tribal persuasions, different faith traditions. And that too seemed to me quite wonderful and liberating and expansive, deprovincializing. So that was one stage. Another stage, as I began teaching these writers in the 60s, particularly Thoreau, was the social justice phase. I was in some sense a creature of the 60s ideologically, and certainly my students were. And so that was phase 2. Phase 3 was the environmental turn. I was a part of the inception of the environmental studies program at the place where I was then teaching, and then later at Harvard too. And literature and environment was one of my staple courses. So my work life brought me back in a new way, a different way, somewhat different way to Emerson and particularly Thoreau. And so that was stage 3. And along the way, I became interested in understanding the whole constellation of writers of that era historically. It just was a terrific moment in history. From a literature standpoint, a creative arts standpoint, the takeoff moment when creative writing in America became of interest and of a quality to rivet the attention of Britain and Europe, as well as respect at home. And that was part of nation building too, sort of part of nation building. It was a kind of counter to the some of the orthodoxies that were going on of nation building. So it was a kind of heretical fringe, as well as participating in the spirit of the country at the same time. But I'm getting away from the religious part of your question, and I think I spoke to that. I think I spoke to that initially. That this spiritual but not religious aspect of Thoreau and the Transcendentalists really was very powerful for me.
And Larry, is it true that you read all of Emerson's sermons as part of your writing your dissertation?
I did. You know, to satisfy the idols of the tribe, the demands of dissertation protocol. In those days, typically, you chose a person that you wanted to study, and you chose uncharted ground in the person that you want to study, which is usually small ground, small patch, because it was already well tilled in the 1960s, and nobody had done much on Emerson's sermons. And so I thought, well, why not me? So I did. I read every one of those blasted sermons, still in manuscript, almost all of them, at Houghton Library. And that was the core of my first book. I wasn't actually keen on writing my first book, Literary Transcendentalism. I was sick of writing to satisfy the pedantry hurdles of my elder handlers and the scholarly world at large. It was the teaching life that really drove me. Again, I was in spirit a professor, but not in terms of its some of its usual expectations. But it was my students, actually, that got me reignited in feeling that I wanted to do writing for publication. The students, I've always been blessed with terrific students, first at Oberlin College in Ohio, then at Harvard, and also elsewhere where I've done shorter-term gigs. And although my Harvard colleagues don't really believe it, it has been the teaching life that's especially ignited and reignited my creative thinking. So then how, after 10 years of retirement, did I manage to write this book? Go figure.
I want to go back to that religious impulse for a second, because I'm curious. We're almost 200 years away from this great flowering of transcendentalism right around here. They were almost 200 years away from the Puritan kind of peak of Puritan literary culture, if you want to call it that. And I'm curious, when you think about what happens here at First Parish now in 2024, like what legacy of transcendentalism is alive here? You know, how has it kind of made its way into the present?
Maybe I'll know better in another 200 years. I don't mean to be merely coy and evasive. I'm going to actually answer your question in a moment, but I want to be coy and evasive first. Scholars of the past are better in dealing with the past than they are in connecting through to the present and the future. Something to bear in mind when you're faced with any scholar. You know, what is she or he good for, and what is she or he not? That is, people that do history and historical type studies. But okay, here's, I guess, what I would say. If you look at our parts of our covenant, for instance, and especially our call to ministry, Cherish the Living Earth stands out as one for sure. That may be about the only dimension of our mission, vision, values statement that differentiates us from liberal Protestant churches elsewhere. So that's one thing. That's quite specific. Another thing is sheer propinquity to the conquered miasma. Miasma, not a right word, but the inviting retreat of Walden Pond and vicinity, the historic sites, houses, the events that continually remind us of that heritage. They create I think a spiritual anchor of sorts for those that notice and resonate with them. That's stronger and more distinctive than you could possibly expect, even out where I first began writing articles and books on the subject in Northern Ohio at Oberlin College, which was settled by New Englanders, the Western Reserve, and had a very strong New England consciousness. But the power of place, to use an omnibus term, I think very important too, and reinforced for this parish in various ways by, for example, the now tradition of silent walks that are taken on Fridays by Andy. So those are just some broad brushstrokes. And if you feel I've left anything out of account that you'd like me to comment on, please say so. And others too.
Oh man,
that happens.
I want to open it up for other people's questions soon. I wanted to go back to Thoreau, or Thoreau. My mom says Thoreau because she taught him for a number of years, but I have not.
She's right. Yeah.
I know. That's how they said it, right?
But I always tell my students, tell everybody that if you say Thoreau and you just can't get out of that habit, you can still understand and enjoy him just as well.
There you go.
My
You're
dissertation,
still welcome.
My dissertation advisor, whom I very greatly value, always said Thoreau. He always said Thoreau. Yeah, I never could break him of the habit. Yeah.
So I wanted to read two little passages and just have you react off the cuff. They both have dogs in them for some reason. First, I'll do the longer one. This is from Walden. I think it's from the beginning. And to me, it's one of my favorite parts. It's a little glimpse into the spiritual kind of longings of Thoreau. I long ago lost a hound, a bay horse, and a turtle dove, and am still on their trail. Many are the travelers I have spoken to concerning them, describing their tracks and what calls they answered to. I have met one or two who had heard the hound and the tramp of the horse, and even seen the dove disappear behind a cloud, and they seemed anxious to recover them as if they had lost them themselves. One of the most mysterious parts of that book, I think. What's he talking about?
Indeed. Much ink has been spilled on that topic, including some really dumb responses. One scholar discovered that if you took hound, bay horse, and turtle dove, the three things that he's lost, they're an anagram for Henry Thoreau doubts love, or Henry Thoreau loves doubt. Right. Thoreau himself was asked about this, and his response would not satisfy you, I think. Everyone has his losses. But then it's not a totally blow-off response either. I think that this parable, if I can call it that, telegraphs the sense of being not a completely young man when he undertook the experience. He was in his late 20s, and being a somewhat older man, a decade older when he completed the book. That the sense of the melancholy undertone of having to contend with challenges and with disappointments, which he did have in his life, both before the experiment, the Walden 2 years there, and during the time when he was laboring over the book. He thought his literary career had tanked, and then he recouped it with Walden. That seasoned him, and I think made the book wiser, and he's referring to that. But he's referring to it very coyly. The larger context is what propelled him to go to Walden. And he doesn't really tell you in detail. He hints at it as an enterprise that he had cherished, but he doesn't say why I moved to Walden at this point then. I think that broadening out, he's trying to keep that part of his saga open so that other people can hang on to it as a template that they can plug their own lifelines into, or they're invited to plug their own lifelines into. And so that blow-off seeming answer, we all have our disappointments, I think really is meant to carry the serious point that, think about it. Might you be able to say the same thing, although you wouldn't maybe use that same language? Final thing, Thoreau's tricky. He's a tricky writer. There's a lot of stuff that you have to read carefully and say, what? And figure out that there is something to it after all. At the very beginning, he requires of every man a sincere account of his own life, and he's going to try to hold himself to that here in this book. This is still the beginning of Walden. Because if any man has lived sincerely, it must have been in another land from me. It's sort of odd, isn't it? It's as if he's confessing that he's really insincere. The sincere person is over in that country there. But no, I think he means is that that every person has his own or her own trajectory, and that's a value in and of itself. It's like going to a distant star to hear another's life sincerely told. But he doesn't tell it to you straight. He sort of hedges. Yeah. Okay, that's more than you really wanted to hear. I'm pretty happy with that answer I just gave you.
I think so. So to stay with this idea of Thoreau as a difficult writer, he's full of paradox, right? And that's something that puts him, to me, in company with great spiritual writers, right? The ability to inhabit paradox. And the second little passage I just want to read to you goes like this. When a dog runs at you, whistle for him. Is that from the journals?
Darned if I know.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is good.
People are always bringing to me Thoreau quotes that I've never heard of, even though I've read everything more than once.
When a dog runs at you, whistle for him.
Absolutely, I could imagine him saying that or writing that for sure. If you, how do you disarm an adversary? This is my immediate take on it. I don't know what the context is, frankly. If there is any context, maybe it's just a detached saying that happened somewhere in the journal. But if you can react on this other creature's wavelength and not shrink away, then the danger will disarm itself. That's the best I can do, but that's pretty obvious. Maybe there's something else that's not so obvious, and maybe it will occur to one of the audience. But I think this is a good quote for you to float up to me, just because it does reinforce that Thoreau likes to express himself in these one-liners that are often teasers and enigmas. And for some, that's sort of irritating. If you want to give Walden a quick read, well, you can do it. You can read it for the story. It's a good story. Homesteading around a year and consorting with the ducks and the mice. But there's more to it than that. And a lot of the meat is carried by these often quite original one-liners or short passages that make you think, and that's why people find Walden a book to reread, or Walden one of those books you take with you to a desert island if you can only take one or two.
That's right. They stick in your head and they reward unpacking and talking about for a long time. Let's open it up to questions from people. And I will make my way around with this microphone so that people can hear online. And let me just say, too, Larry did bring some books, Henry David Thoreau, Thinking Disobediently, and those are available after we're done here. Peter, I saw your hand, and then Liz.
Well, one of my favorite facts is that Thoreau came to Lincoln, to Flint's Pond, I believe, before he ended up at Walden, and the Flints said, "No, get out of town." Any comments?
I think that's an unquote fact rather than a fact. His freshman roommate was a wheeler, Charles Stearns Wheeler, who constructed and lived for a while in a shanty on Flint's Pond. And Thoreau visited him there and hung out there. Alas, young Wheeler died at an early age, but it was something in Thoreau's experience that I think helped motivate him to do what he did. Did he ever ask the Flints for permission Not that I know, but it makes a good story because it resonates with something that is in Walden, where he complains about the name Flint's Pond. Farmers naming landforms after themselves. Must have been some skinflint. So I think that's the basis of the legend. And why it got created in Lincoln, of course, Lincolnites are defensive about their heritage, understandably. And nothing more fun than to throw bricks at Thoreau next door. And he was sort of a pissy character sometimes. So that's conjecturally why maybe this legend got formed. But thank you, Peter, for raising this question. It gives me a chance to correct the historical record.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for this. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process, your own process?
Oh, my writing process. I like to write some days. I tend to write in bursts, you might say. When I was in the working world, I found that it was mostly just during longer stretches, vacations, or times that I was on sabbatical, that I could do extensive writing. The rest was more mulling, note-taking, stuff like that. I've never been one of those like Dickens or somebody that I was going to write 1,500 words a day between 8 in the morning and 11, and then I was going to go to my club. No. I never could work it that way. My experience has been that sometimes long fallow stretches and nothing works, nothing congeals, except if I want to write some very short piece like a book review. And then maybe because I've bat my head against the wall, metaphorically speaking, there are times when everything seems to congeal, and I'm cruising, and I can't believe how much I managed to produce that's not half bad in a short period of time. This is not sounding very scientific, is it? But it's God's truth, as far as the writing life of this humble individual is concerned. It's satisfying on balance, Liz. But that doesn't mean it is always. John. Oh, I should let Nate do the recognition.
First, I have a couple of comments. But first of all, I want to say that the combination of you and Nate is fantastic. And you should take this show on the road.
Maybe we could charge admission for it.
Yeah, I think it certainly could. I think it was wonderful. Look at the crowd here. But I've always loved the way you answer questions. You're so attentive, and it's just terrific. But my comment, that was just before my pre-comment.
Now the other shoe, yes.
No, there's no other shoe. I love that quote about the whistling the dog. It seems very Buddhist to me and very Sufi. I mean, you can think of, saying, bring all your enemies to you. So I think it's a very fascinating spiritual kind of thing to think about. If the dog runs towards you, whistle. And it's sort of expanding your heart. So I love that. Thank you.
I like it. That's good.
So, Larry, do you want to comment on Jones? No, all right. Oh, this may be slightly frivolous, but a lot of us will remember the novelist Jane Langton, who attended here for a while, and in her mystery novels, the detective Homer Kelly has always made me think of you. And I wondered if anybody knows if Jane intended that or based her character.
Wait a minute. What is the question? Was Jane Langton influenced by me?
No. Are you familiar with Jane Langton's
Oh, yes.
stories?
Jane was a friend, yeah.
Yeah. Homer Kelly, is that you?
No. No. Jane's ideas were congealed before the two of us met. We moved to Kim and I moved to Lincoln in 1990, and we did become acquainted pretty quickly with Jane, and fond of each other. But her works that most explicitly spoke to the Transcendentalists, like The Transcendental Murder, which turns on Thoreau and Emily Dickinson having had a secret love affair and a child. That preceded our acquaintance. So Jane's her own genius, and miss her and really liked her and valued her acquaintance.
Surely we have a few more. Susan.
From the way you described Thoreau, I also am thinking about your great American novel and can't help but think of Moby Dick. And they were contemporaries. They were both kind of put in a mental box for me in my history and literature classes. You've studied both. Is Moby Dick and Walden part of the same thought school?
Well, they're part of the same era. Those two writers were Herman Melville and Henry Thoreau were almost exactly contemporaries. Thoreau, to my knowledge, never read Melville. Melville knew about Thoreau. He had mixed feelings about the Transcendentalists. And in one of his novels, it looks like there are two figures that he creates that are an Emerson caricature and a Thoreau caricature who are kind of chilly and prickly and difficult characters, both of them. So let's say Melville, I know Melville was quite influenced by Emerson, not by Thoreau, but by Emerson in certain ways, but he had great reservations. One of them was the sense of chilliness. As he once said about Emerson, he must have had a defect around the region of the heart. Melville was a more robust and expansive temperament, so that sort of reaction fits. But you can see similar sorts of interests in challenging religious and political orthodoxies, in fashioning very ambitious sagas that have symbolic overtones that seem to want to give them world historical stakes. Thoreau's first book that was a flop, which in some ways is even more ambitious than Walden is, A Week on the Concord and Merrimack River. It sounds sleepy, but it takes all of history from Adam and Eve on down, and comparative religious perspective, and the Aboriginal dispensation versus the settler culture dispensation, and topics on all sorts of moral ideas, friendship, the relative merits of work and contemplation, and blows it up into a macro trip as opposed to a simple 2-week river trip. That reminds me often of Melville's earlier works, particularly this messy splotch, Polynesian allegorical narrative called Marty. That's a run-up to Moby Dick. Moby Dick is much more under control, believe it or not. There were Melville books that were less under control than Moby Dick. The spiritual exploratory character of both all of those writers is a common thread, even though they wouldn't have been best buddies in the same room.
Well, Larry also makes this great comparison, which I'd never thought about, between the pond in Walden and the white whale in Moby Dick. As Walden unfolds, the pond looms up not only as its geographical center and all-seasons resort of pleasure and fascination, but also as a numinous presence, a benign equivalent of the white whale in Melville's Moby Dick, which I love.
I did say that.
There you go.
I should have thought of that right away, and that would have made an end to it. Yeah.
It's 12:32. I know some folks probably have other things to get to. Does anybody have a final thought or a question to share?
Pam? Oh,
Amen.
I'm glad to. Thank you for coming.
So much fun. There's some books right there that are available to buy. Work out a price with Larry. And
yeah, right. Okay, I'll tell you about that. They would cost you $20, which is more than you'd have to pay on Amazon. But I will sign them. But I can use them in other contexts, and so ad lib. Thank you for coming very much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Larry.